In retrospect, post-processing made my photography journey a little more difficult than it had to be. And I want to dissect that with you today, and I want to share with you where I am today in relations to my creative vision, my work in post-processing. And this whole conversation really came about when I had a client book me in my professional world. It was a high school reunion, like from the 1950s or whatever, and they had a very peculiar ask. As you can imagine, everyone in the room was old, and they would do these yearly reunions, which was a reason for them, or a purpose for them really, to get out the house and reunite with old friends and whatnot. They would do it every 5 years, I believe it was, but this year was a particularly big one because they had lost a lot of folks to COVID, and they wanted to document the people that were left, and they decided, you know what, we need to bring a professional in-house. And one of their requests were, they had a TV set up at the venue, and they wanted me to display the images as I took them. And I had to stop myself because the initial response was, fuck no, what are you talking about? Find somebody else. But one of the core rules of business is not to say no to clients. And I don't really agree with it, but my version of it is you should at least try to see how you can accommodate a request from a client. And ultimately, a request from a client is really how they envision things, and that's their creative vision that they're hiring you to execute. So I like to challenge myself when people make these strange requests. So what was I going to do? This was not a time for me to concede to my insecurities as a photographer. This was a time for me to lean in my confidence in how I understand the exposure triangle, how I can deliver an image that's well exposed, how I can add artificial light because I shoot with a speed light for my event photography, and my knowledge of maneuvering a venue and paying attention to the ceilings, the height of the ceiling, where can I bounce the flash, where's the lighting weird, and the white balance, and all of these things. And I took the challenge. And immediately when I arrived at the venue, I always arrive at venues 15 to 20 minutes early to scope out what's happening. Anxiety kicked in. Can I do this? You know what? Fuck it, I can do it. Essentially, what I did was I had to shoot in JPEG only because I was essentially taking the memory card and putting the JPEG images onto a laptop where they had a slideshow going. For my camera settings, this was the first time that I actually turned on the soft skin setting in my Sony, and I put it to light because part of what sets me aside in my professional event work is I do a little bit of retouching for all of my photos. I like to have my clients portrayed in a very, let's call it, polished way. Everyone looks good, and I want to make sure they look great when I deliver this. And I want to make sure that that feeling of when I have a client who hires me for portraits and they get that image back and they go, whoa, that looks like me, but it looks like a much more polished version of me. I took the challenge to bundle that into my event work. And because I couldn't do this in post, I had to do it at the event. I was oh so thankful that Sony had this one feature that we as photographers looked at and go, who the hell is using this? It was there, and it was useful to me in my business. I was floored. This was what got me thinking different about post-processing. This was what gave me the confidence and the perspective that I don't always need to run home to export images to Photoshop to make a moment better. Either you captured the moment or you didn't. There's no amount of being a Photoshop ninja that saves that. It can contribute to it, but it always doesn't have to be the case, right? So retrospectively speaking, I started to notice how post-processing really hindered my progression as a creative and as a photographer, because it was this weird thing of I would spend hours in the street learning the camera. I would spend hours in the street learning the street as my subject matter. And then I would come home and spend hours learning post-processing and learning masking and how to do all this crazy color grading and image correcting and cropping. And I was learning so much at so many things in such a little bit of time, and I drowned in all of them, and I wasn't able to give any one thing my hyper focus. And I felt like the 10 years that it took me to arrive as a photographer the way I wanted to be a photographer, I probably could have done that in 7 or 5 years, right? So it was a very interesting awakening for me, the request that a client had, and then going home and thinking and sitting with it. Holy shit, I pulled that off. And the validation was there, because I would have to read the room. The first few times I dumped the memory card onto the laptop, I sat back and looked in my own, let's call it anxiety and insecurities. I'm looking at the guest to see, are they on their phones texting people? Oh my God, this photographer's like, no, that wasn't it. No one was looking at the images like they were trash. They were looking at the images like, wow, I'm in the moment. They weren't critiquing the images. And if they weren't critiquing the images, it means that the images were fine. It means that the mission was at play. I was successful in the request that they had. Now, if they looked at the images and say, why is it so dark? Then I failed. Then my insecurities were justified. Then I knew I should have skipped this request, but that wasn't the case. So I could look back now and say, did I ever really truly need to run home and put these images in Photoshop? And then it also brings me to a place of realizing the amount of research and time and energy I put into editing images in post really is a cover-up for the fact that I didn't quite understood my image, or I'm sorry, my camera and the exposure triangle. I didn't really understand how to, more so not to get a properly exposed image, because that's up to creative interpretation. I didn't know how to have the image exposed in camera the way I wanted it to be, right? And that's a problem. And now these days, I'm such a monster in understanding the technical abilities of my camera, the ISO, how far I can push ISO. I've got a Sony a7 IV as my professional workhorse, so I can get away with ISOs up to 6400 without post-processing. My shutter speed, I know that an older crowd, they're not moving that fast. I can shoot them at 1/80th of a second to get as much light as possible. The aperture, I don't need to shoot everything at f2.8. In fact, shooting things at f2.8 can be a detriment sometimes, because the person to the left won't be in focus unless I'm way back. I can shoot things at 5.6 and still get a decently exposed image. And then that's why I have a speed light. And I can add my flash in there. I can bounce the flash off the roof. I can bounce it off the side. And all these things get me the image that I want. And I didn't even have to land it in Photoshop. And then also I can enable the soft skin mode in the camera. I can enable things like the dynamic range optimization or whatever it's called. These are all things that puts together a beautiful JPEG. And that leads me to color science. So many of us do this bullshit where I like Sony over Canon, or I like Canon over Sony because Canon's color science, yay! And then there's the Fuji guy off in the corner that's like, yeah, you like color science? Have you met Fuji, right? These things don't matter when you're just gonna run home and put a raw file in Photoshop in Lightroom and then do whatever the hell you do to it. Shouldn't you be shooting JPEG? Shouldn't Frono's photo be thumbs down in this video? Because if you really like that color science, then use it. It exists in the JPEG more so than it does raw, right? So there's this weird awakening that's been happening in me for the last 3 years. And one of the things I'll say is it really gives me an appreciation for my cameras. What does that mean? My Fuji gives me a very film look. I got a ton of custom recipes on there. And if I'm feeling artistic, I grab my Fuji. If I'm working an event for a client, I grab my Sony. Now, I'm not saying I'm not editing my client's photos in RAW and Photoshop. That's nonsense, because I charge my client. I have an estimate of how long it'll take me to, how long I'll spend in post-production editing photos based on the length of the event. I charge for that. So I do still edit that, but more so this conversation's about my creative work. I'll grab my Sony if I want a hyper realistic or hyper authentic look at what it was when I saw it. I have my Olympus. I really love the look that comes off of my Olympus cameras as well, right? Just as much as I love the Fuji. But my Olympus cameras, I keep my 85mm equivalent lens on there, or I've got a crazy telephoto zoom on there. So I'm in this world now where, because I've walked away from post-processing in the creative side of things, my cameras are now tools, and very specialized tools. Is it the look I'm looking for? Is it the perspective I'm looking for? Then I'll grab a specific camera. It's so nice to be able to rotate all of my cameras based on the idea that I have and the creative look that I'm going for. It's this, like, it comes to this culmination in one of my previous videos, where, try not to get emotional right now, where as a father of a newborn, and as a person that's starting this new era in my life and expanding my family, the photos that I've been taking since my daughter has been born, and even so throughout the pregnancy, my wife's pregnancy, this is the best work of my life. And when I take the photos off of the memory card, I am not copying anything into Photoshop. I am not post-processing anything. I'm taking those photos out and I'm putting them straight on the computer into OneDrive. That's my cloud storage. And I'm sending it to my wife. Memories are exactly the way I envisioned them. And I didn't once touch a contrast slider. I didn't once recrop the way it is to fix the composition. I didn't apply the noise reduction filter. I didn't bump up the clarity. I didn't do a masking tool. I didn't do anything. Today, I do zero post-processing in my creative work. And my family photography is amazing. It floors me every time I look at it. I get emotional every time I look at it. And this is how I wanted to feel as a photographer. My name is Ramon. Welcome to the channel. I hope you like this video. I hope you are inspired by this video. I hope this video helps you challenge the norms that you see in the photography community and what we as photographers and creators should and shouldn't be doing. Because by going in and out and in and out of these things, oftentimes we don't allow ourselves to do what the fuck it is we want to do. Like this video if you like it, subscribe to the channel, and I always say, give me 3 videos. Go back on the channel, check out another video or 2, and if you like my style, if you like my message, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. I'm out of here. Peace.